So there's a pretty good chance that you've already heard about rewilding.
I just wanted a richer and rawer life than I've been able to lead in Britain, or indeed that we can lead in most parts of the industrialized world. And it was only when I stumbled across an unfamiliar word that I began to understand what I was looking for. And as soon as I found that word, I realized that I wanted to devote much of the rest of my life to it. The word is rewilding.
So there's a couple of different perspectives on rewilding. There's the purely ecological aspect where the sole focus is on restoring and safeguarding natural ecosystems, and this really recognizes the functional importance of areas of wilderness and the impact that that can have on the health and biodiversity of the whole planet, really. And a big part of this is encouraging the return of many apex predators and other keystone species of plants and fungi. So this is crucially important work, and the survival of our own species is pretty much dependent on it succeeding. And then, of course, we have this other aspect to rewilding that focuses on human behavior and the way in which we interact with nature, and that's kind of what I'm going to be talking about here. Now, by this point, it's totally obvious that we're polluting the hell out of all of the natural ecosystems on this planet faster than we're able to clean them up and heal them, and we're polluting our own inner ecology as well with processed, disease-promoting food-like products, and all of the packaging and the excrement of all of this stuff also just gets sent back out into the wilderness. So transitioning towards a new human culture that interfaces seamlessly with the rhythms and the cycles of nature, of course that's no small task, but it's kind of mandatory now if we want to see healing and rehabilitation take place on a local or a global level. A fascinating part of rewilding is the practice of learning about plants, animals, fungi, their role in the ecosystem and their nutritional and medicinal properties, and how we can begin sustaining ourselves through a more direct relationship with nature. So less monoculture, less mass-produced crap, and more interaction with the surrounding environment. It can only be a good thing. And of course, this also points towards our growing disconnection from nature due to the culture of technology that we're all just drowning in now. And the thing is, even when most people do go outside, they do go to natural areas, they still spend most of the time looking at their phones. Biology doesn't change and evolve as quickly as technology does, so there are severe consequences when we try to unplug from nature and instead plug directly into the internet for all of our human needs. Now, we're not biologically adapted to doing that, so it won't work. People are losing the ability to interact face to face, to make eye contact. We're struggling more now to manage our emotions, and we're forgetting that nature is our home. It's not some dangerous and unpredictable chaos that lies beyond the borders of our sanitized, domesticated new reality full of alerts, likes, comments, and social hierarchy based on the amounts of followers we have. But all of that stuff is part of our current reality. And it would be stupid to think that we can all just simply run for the hills and permanently renounce it. I think it's pretty fair to say that most of the global catastrophes that we face are the result of mainstream convenience culture. But the thing is, there isn't enough planet for all 7 billion people to just return to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, nor would most people even want to do that anyway, Modern life has far too many upsides for that. Personally speaking, I think it's really important that we try to incorporate more wildness into our lives, but our culture has got momentum in completely the opposite direction to that, so, there's a big problem there. Like, how do we walk along that very narrow dichotomy of nature and this technologically driven society without finding ourselves in the middle of an existential crisis. A long time ago, I went to London to visit a friend for 2 weeks, but I ended up living there for 7 years. Now, there were some amazing people and opportunities that were very unique to the city, but after 7 years, I was desperate to leave. And it seems to me like densely populated urban environments seem to require stress in order to function. And eventually that constant atmosphere of tension had a negative residual effect on my health. It wasn't good at all. So we moved to the countryside, surrounded by areas of forest and coastline that are teeming with wildlife, and it made an enormous difference. But ultimately, it wasn't enough. Now, the problem that I had, and still have, is that despite spending a lot more time in nature, eating local food, moving my body more naturally, I was still struggling psychologically and emotionally. There was still a lot of unresolved trauma from the past, and that still felt extremely difficult to work with. So even though being in a very peaceful, green environment was very healing, it definitely did give me a platform to better approach and address all of these things, but that in itself was not enough to weed out the core of the problem for me. As I began to make progress through healing and become more educated in health matters and gain more experience, I began to share some of what I was learning online, and eventually I started an online business that took up a lot of my time and attention, and it still does. Now, it's the internet that made all of this possible. It made it possible to share information, to share my experiences with other people. It became possible to connect with people and help people from all over the world. It was amazing, but it also meant that I had to spend a lot more time online. Immersing ourselves in nature can improve our well-being on just about every level, but for a lot of people, there still remains a lot of personal inner demons to pacify, and combining that with the increasing cultural emphasis on the internet, it makes rewilding our personal lives a puzzle that nobody seems to have solved yet. As essential as some form of rewilding is to biodiversity and to our human culture, I can't help feeling like the rewilding marketing has become a bit obsessed with the nature out there and ways in which we can take it and put more of it in here. And of course that is a worthwhile quest, but we should be aware that nature doesn't only exist out there, it's already in here. There's a funny kind of irony at play here though, because no matter where I am, my body and mind are made out of nature. Even if I'm in an office, hunched over a desk in the middle of the city, I'm still not separate from nature. I mean, sure, spending time by the ocean, in the mountains, or in the forest, that's going to help me enormously, but I'm still made out of nature wherever I am. So can't we also rewild ourselves internally with the nature that we already have within? Because if nature in its unadulterated state is inherently wild, and we are made out of nature, then surely our own core human nature is also wild. We could say that all organic life on this planet is carbon-based, and therefore we're all made from the same natural ingredients, but that feels a bit dry and uninspiring. So we could say that the indigenous medical and spiritual traditions from the ancient past, especially from the East, pretty much all recognized nature as a manifestation of the elements. And I'm not talking about the periodic table, I'm talking about the basic elements of nature. But even that's no use if all we have is a conceptual understanding of it, so we have to put it into practice. And if we begin to pay attention, we can start to feel the elements of nature within us. We can actually feel the density of the earth within us, giving structure to the physical body. We can feel the water within. 60% of the adult human body is water. Our blood, lymph, hormones, cerebrospinal fluid, the cytoplasm, interstitial fluid, sweat. The fire is our body temperature and it's our digestion. And the wind is our breath and it's our movement. It's what animates the body. Even on the level of the mind and the emotions, we can experience these elements. For example, earth can provide emotional stability. It can give us a very grounded disposition, but it can also generate feelings of pride and mental inflexibility. The water element is what allows us to adapt to changing circumstances. It can provide a fluid transition of thoughts and feelings, but it also plays a directing role in feelings of depression and sadness. And of course, if we become too emotional and too sad, we can end up secreting the water element from our eyes. Fire can give us courage, focus, and determination, and it can give us the competitive drive to succeed, but it's also very much present in feelings of anger and hatred and violent behavior. Wind is what gives movement to the mind. It's our thoughts. It's our constant internal dialogue. It's the conceptual mind. It gives us creativity. It gives us emotional sensitivity. But if we become too sensitive to the wind, we can become very anxious, worried, fearful, and obsessive. So we can experience a very practical sensory interaction with these elements, which are the raw, wild elements of nature, the very same elements that make up this world around us. And this is why traditional Tibetan medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, and Chinese medicine all had some form of the 5-element system within their teachings, because they understood a very long time ago the interconnected nature of reality, and that we are all part of that fabric. We're not separate from it. With practice, it's absolutely possible that we can experience for ourselves that there really is no separation between the nature out there and the nature in here. It's a very solid, almost concrete illusion of separation, and with practice that begins to decompose, and we can experience for ourselves firsthand that we are nature. Wilderness, unlike the conventional opinion, isn't this chaotic, unpredictable and dangerous mayhem existing beyond the perimeters of human civilization. The wilderness is highly organized and it's working towards a delicate homeostasis constantly. It's always striving towards balance. In essence, the wilderness is the true embodiment of sanity. Many large corporations, on the other hand, are comparatively sociopathic or even psychotic entities that really have no long-term sustainability mindset. So personal gain, regardless of the consequences for others, is the general template. So therefore, I think true rewilding must involve cultivating sanity on an internal level, on a personal level, because our true nature, our own wildness, just like the wildness of the world, is sane. It seems to me that if our rewilding strategy is mostly concerned with ways in which we can consume nature or just work with it externally, then there's always the possibility that our interaction with nature may not be completely sane. Perhaps we won't be able to embrace the bigger picture beyond our own ego. So if we don't rewild the mind, it probably won't take us long to return to the cultural priorities of convenience and consumerism. And sure, those things may become a bit greener, but the core problem won't have been transformed. It won't have been uprooted. It would have just been pruned to fit into a different infrastructure. The unfortunate reality is that people everywhere right now are plagued with mental illness, with anxiety, stress, trauma, depression, compulsive, repetitive habits, and toxic ideologies. And these things have probably never been more pandemic than they are right now. But the widespread nature of these conditions is really just a reaction. It's the natural reaction to feeling completely isolated in a world where everything is actually interconnected and interdependent. And there's a wonderful Tibetan word that describes this perfectly. The word is tendrel. And tendrel explains the nature of our reality, because ten means dependent and drel means connected. So tendrel means interconnected interdependence. Nature is a complex web of transient, impermanent phenomena, and it isn't possible for us to exist outside of that. But if we feel like we're separate from it, then we can become imprisoned by our own incorrect perception, and we just start to wilt. And psychological and emotional problems will naturally arise from that. It's only natural that we would experience these things when we're always stimulated, we're always stressed, we don't seek to connect with people in the flesh, instead we choose to do it all online, we don't sleep when it's dark, we don't eat real food, we don't drink clean water, we don't have good natural posture, and we don't breathe properly. So much of the time we don't focus our attention on what we're doing, and instead we just try to multitask as many different things as possible, and we just disregard the principles of nature and attempt to separate ourselves from nature. But as we've seen, that's really not possible, because the same nature that is out there is also in here. People often escape to areas of natural beauty to get away from it all and experience some peace and tranquility in their lives. But by practicing stillness, by turning towards our inner nature, our inner wildness, it is possible to catch a glimpse of the tranquility that we all have within us. And the irony is, we don't actually need to do anything to start rewilding the mind. Now, there are tantric yoga practices that we can use to cultivate and strengthen the natural elements that make up our bodies and minds. We can work with our subtle anatomy, the complex matrix of channels, meridians, and energy centers, and develop ourselves spiritually. But to simply experience the stillness of the mind, the clarity and the tranquility that's innate to all of us, we just have to rest, which is something that modern culture places absolutely no emphasis on whatsoever. It really is so important that we practice not clinging to those constant thoughts and emotions about the past and the future. And obviously that's not an easy task to undertake, but it's a practice. And like with all things that we practice, we get better at it the more that we do it. So, it's just so important to resist this compulsive temptation to keep looking at our phones. We just have to create a new habit. We have to spend time every day checking in with ourselves and just paying restful attention on the elements of nature that constitute our bodies and minds and create the world all around us. Everything is nature, and if we begin to experience that for ourselves, then it is possible to invite more harmony into our lives. We can start to understand what we are made out of and how we function on a truly holistic level, and realize that this body and mind is an ecosystem, which is also part of a much bigger ecosystem. But we start by slowing down, by being still, being quiet, and being kind to ourselves, and stop putting so much pressure on ourselves. This isn't a competition. You are just nature, just like everything else. Now, this video is as much a note to self as it is a message to you watching it, but it's also a prologue of what's to come, because I'm going to be introducing the fundamental basics of traditional Tibetan medicine here on this channel in the coming weeks and months. Now, I've been a student and practitioner of Tibetan medicine for a number of years now, and it's a very ancient yet highly sophisticated system that is based entirely on the principles of nature. I think it's quite possibly the most important and useful content that I could share on here. It's a system for physical and mental well-being, for diet, for lifestyle, medicines and therapies, but it's also a philosophy for living and dying. And it's a completely holistic system that has really benefited innumerable people over thousands of years, but it only actually left the isolation of the Tibetan plateau relatively recently. So unlike Ayurveda or traditional Chinese medicine, sharing it with a Western audience is still kind of a new thing. So if you're excited to follow along with this journey, then make sure you hit the bell icon so that you can actually be updated every time a new video is uploaded. And if you haven't subscribed already, maybe now is a good time to consider doing that, or not. It's entirely up to you. Anyway, take care, and I'll be back here to talk with you again soon.